Hello and welcome to today's reading and reflection for Saturday, July the 25th. Our reading today is from Luke chapter 22, verses 14 to 23. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him. They began to question among themselves which one of them might be that would do this. As I read this passage, I felt such a loss. Something that I've missed over the past 4 months. Something I've missed deeply. The last time I took Holy Communion was back in March. And I know that a lot of other people feel the same. While there have been communion services online, giving people the opportunity to participate in a spiritual communion, it just hasn't felt the same. There's nothing quite like receiving the bread in your hands or to hold the chalice. But here in this passage, we're reminded that Jesus knew what was coming. Jesus knew what the next few days had in store as he made these careful preparations for his last Passover meal with the disciples. They were more than just his disciples, they were his friends. He'd spent the past 3 years with them. These were friends who would laugh and cry together, friends who would ask each other questions, friends who knew so much of each other's thoughts and the quirks in their personalities. And yet here Jesus knows that this is going to be the last meal he shares with them before his death. An ending which could simply have had a sense of inevitability, but Jesus knows the following day and his death would not be the end. He knew that this day would point to a new beginning, the fulfillment of God's perfect plan, the fulfillment of the kingdom of God. But in the midst of all this, he knew exactly who was going to betray him, who would give him up to the authorities. And yet there around that table, as they ate and drank together, there would have been that speculation amongst them, with each one of them wondering who Jesus was talking about. And Judas, well, he would have felt shocked to hear those words and probably would be wondering just how Jesus knew it. When we participate in receiving the sacraments, when we share in the bread and the wine, it can be so easy to forget why we have them, what we're supposed to learn from them. And one thing lockdown has taught us is that this is so much more than a habit. This is far more than something that we can take for granted. This passage gives us an opportunity to stop and pay close attention to the reasons why we take communion. And I'm sure that when the time comes that we can all once again participate in receiving communion, that we will all appreciate it in a new way. When we share in the Lord's Supper, the message of the cross comes to us via our hearing as we hear those words spoken, recalling why we celebrate this meal. But we also experience it through our sight and our smell and our taste and our touch, because when we share, we can think about each one of our senses and how Jesus actually impacts upon our whole life. When we eat a meal, whatever the meal is, we can experience so many things. In the film Oliver, the boys in the workhouse simply imagined the taste of that food, glorious food. And the reality, well, it was gruel. Their imaginations took them to a place that was far more than what the actual meal was. When we share in communion, we share far more than just bread and wine. This meal's different. It's not a pretense. This meal is reality. And Jesus' body would be broken just as the bread was. And the wine, as we pour it out, we remember that Jesus poured out his blood for you and for me. Rather than this meal representing the end, this represents a beginning, a new covenant. This meal sees the beginning of the road to freedom for all of us. At the Last Supper, Jesus models a self-giving love. Here at this table, he's among his disciples as one who serves, as well as being a friend. As we take part in this act of communion, as a community, we should think about what each one of those elements represents and reflect on how thankful we are that Jesus came to save each one of us. We do it in remembrance of him. When we receive bread and wine, we aren't taking part in a religious ritual. We're celebrating our relationship. And as we stretch our hands out to receive, we approach the person of Jesus. He's not contained in the gift of bread and wine. He is the gift. The celebration of the Lord's Supper is about embracing Jesus himself. When Jesus said these words, he simply said, "This is me. This is me, and I'm here for you." And Jesus' actions on the cross, as he stretched out his arms, "This is me, and I'm here for you."